Hello everyone, great to be here today. My name is Wasim Khaled. I am CEO and co-founder of Blackbird.AI. Blackbird is a technology company that helps some of the world's largest organizations understand and respond to disinformation and misinformation. This is something that we're all dealing with on a daily basis, and this is a very important week to be here discussing this topic. Now, I am here today to talk about perception, lies, and AI. But before we do that, we're going to do a little experiment. Since I've got such a great crowd here today, I'm only going to tell you two things. I'm about to play an audio phrase for you, and it's going to repeat. You're going to have to take my word for it that it never changes. I'm also going to flash a couple of phrases on the screen. So, ask yourself, what do you hear?
That is embarrassing! 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 That is embarrassing!
All right, I saw a couple of reactions here. Let me tell you a little bit about what you just experienced. That's called an auditory illusion, okay? What I did here was I knew something about how audio and visual stimuli is processed, and I exploited that to mess with your head a little bit, right? Now, some of you might have even felt a little bit uncomfortable on that last screen, and there's a reason for that. It's because no one likes to be manipulated. And so when we talk about disinformation and misinformation, it's really not about what is true and what is false. It is about manipulation of the narrative. And what we are experiencing in today's information ecosystem is nothing less than a battle of the narratives. What I've always thought about since 2017 when we founded the company, a cyber attack on human perception. Now, every organization has a narrative. And every narrative has a counter-narrative, sometimes dozens of counter-narratives. What everyone has to understand here, it is the conflict between the narrative and the counter-narrative that creates an opening for threat actors to polarize communities and society against one another, but also to drive some sort of sometimes ideological or financial gain or motive. Now, people get sideswiped by what we call narrative attacks on an almost weekly basis now. So what is a narrative attack? So the way we define this is any kind of assertion in the information ecosystem that can drive harm against a person, place, or thing. Now, a thing could be something as innocuous as an HR policy or an ingredient in a product. But what you have to understand about a narrative attack is that a single post or comment can turn into something that creates immense damage, both financially and reputationally. Threat actors are just waiting for this opportunity. They use every tool available in the toolkit to make sure that the narrative they want seen are seen by as many people as possible. Now, they use bot networks, they use techniques to make sure that the online groups that maybe you want the least attention from are the ones you get the most attention from. They use generative AI to fabricate entirely warped realities, and they can do it fast. And these are not black swan events any longer. Since we started the company, you'd see one of these maybe once a year. Now we see them almost every week. I'm sure you recognize some of these. Billions and billions of dollars of damage have been caused by narrative attacks. There's just a name for it now. We also have generative AI. So, when it comes to generative AI, we see fabricated images being used by threat actors to create entirely curated narratives that they cannot tell the difference between false and what I think is most important about this is it's low cost, it's scalable, and when you're on LinkedIn seeing all the cool things that generative AI can do for your company, know that these threat actors are also there watching and waiting and scaling their information operations campaigns. So it is no surprise that the World Economic Forum has declared misinformation and disinformation one of the largest global threats, the #1 global threat in 2024. And this is across economic, technological, and societal categories. Now, I spend a little time thinking about what is an accessible case study that I could show this audience to really help them understand how a narrative attack works. We're, as you can imagine, in the midst of a lot of analysis for a lot of hairy topics and situations. Geopolitical risk, wars, vaccines, anti-vax. But you know, there was one particular report that we put out that pulled me into more newsrooms and got me in front of more cameras than almost anything else. It's probably a hard one to guess. It's not wars, it's not vaccines. It was Taylor Swift, okay? So stick with me for a moment here. If you're not following some of the weirdness, a Guardian poll recently showed that 1 in 5 Americans believe that Taylor Swift is a government asset and a Psyop. Okay. Well, how did that come to pass? Well, it started with the usual suspects. It was a conspiracy theory in the dark web, moved to public Telegram channels, landed on social media. It then moved into the mainstream media, and everyone started picking it up. I mean, this was a week before the Super Bowl. They needed to talk about Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift. Before anyone knew it, millions of people had been exposed to these narratives and to these conspiracies. And you know, marketing 101, you see something 7 times, it sinks in. That's kind of how these work. But what was really happening in the information ecosystem? That's what's critical, and that's what we really focus on at Blackbird. So what you're seeing here is the information ecosystem as it was behaving during the lead up to that narrative. These jellyfish-like structures that you're seeing here, it's what a narrative actually looks like if you have the ability to visualize it. This is our Constellation platform. The tentacles are actually connections between multiple narratives and sub-narratives and counter-narratives. It's a pretty big mess, unless you know how to read it. Now, the red that you see here are actually bot-like actors. Very important quality to understand. I'll talk a little bit more about why in a moment. This also enables you to pull out executive summaries to help you make strategic decisions across comms and threat intelligence and a host of other areas. Everything from insider threats to M&A, our platform has been utilized to make stronger, faster decisions. Now here you can see the narrative was almost 90%, the narrative risk. Bot-like activity, 25-ish%. Important to know, if there are bots propping up narratives, you might not want to take the bait and react to it. Today you can make that decision. And finally, cohorts. Cohorts are like-minded tribes of online actors, the ones you might want to avoid. Now here we saw NFL fans and Swifties coming to Taylor Swift's defense in the narrative. However, there were Russian state actors amplifying these narratives. Why is that? Well, as it turns out, almost anything that gets enough eyeballs, you will have threat actors amplify those narratives, especially when you can polarize broader societal divides to create friction and ultimately erosion of trust. Now, not every brand is Taylor Swift. To be resilient like a narrative attack like this, when it hits you, you can't always bounce back. And we've seen companies lose $20, $25 billion in a matter of weeks, and they never really bounce back. I'll give you another example, Silicon Valley Bank. A lot of people call this the first social media-driven bank run. Now, I want to be really clear. If you had narrative intelligence to understand what was happening that week, it wouldn't have stopped the bank from failing. Okay, it's a whole different topic. Okay. However, let's say that you banked with Silicon Valley, or you were partners, or you were just looking to understand what was happening. You would have had a big, big early warning if you were able to understand what was really happening. Now, in this case, part of the narrative, it's just an interesting point. What you see coded in blue is a cohort that we label as anti-capitalists, right? They were driving narratives that created a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, And that cohort will often appear in almost anything related to an M&A, banking narrative, et cetera, right? And then when you dig in, you also see all of the cohorts, the bot-like activity, and everything else that was happening within that ecosystem, right? Now, I want to be clear that Constellation is a team that is a tool that teams like threat intel analysts and comms teams can use to better make decisions. We're also going to talk about one more tool that we have in just a few minutes that anyone can use. I also want to talk a little bit about deepfakes and generative AI. Now, I hear from our customers on an almost regular basis that they want to understand if there's deepfakes out that are manipulating their narratives. That's an important thing to understand, but in a world where almost everything is going to have some amount of analysis or manipulation by generative AI, using legitimate tools, by the way, it could be, Office 360 or all of the tools that integrate Gen AI. Just knowing it's Gen AI is not enough. Let's assume that all the content is going to have a percentage of Gen AI analysis around it. It's important to know more so how that deepfake impacts the public and how far it's spread. Because if a deepfake falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, it may not be worth responding to. Tools make this very easy. Things like this.
I'm going to show you some magic. It's the real thing. I mean, it's all the real.
It takes 10, 20 seconds of video, a social media post with audio, and you can generate something like this in a matter of minutes. Anyone can do it, but you have to also see how it moves through networks. Now, you may be wondering, is my organization susceptible to these types of attacks? Can we see these things coming? I mean, I'm just going to tell you, after talking to hundreds of organizations for the past 6, 7 years, more than likely, you're not going to see it coming. And our customers are always asking us, are we next? There's 3 questions you can ask. Maybe if you're a CEO or a board member or someone who's in charge of communications, you ask these 3 questions to your customers. The first, if we are under attack, how will I understand the contagion-like effect of narratives? How fast they're spreading, particularly when they're mutating and evolving. Then, how am I going to understand which of those narratives are bot-driven, synthetically amplified? You all are probably familiar with share of voice. Well, you have to be worried about synthetic share of voice. And finally, who and what are the hyper-agenda-driven groups that are propping up this narrative? And are they collaborating, which can cause even more harm to my organization? If you can't understand these kinds of risk signals today, fast, at the moment of crisis, you are fighting blind, all right? So, high fidelity, high resolution technology must be deployed. I know I've thrown a lot out today, and it can sometimes seem insurmountable or daunting when you hear this all at once, particularly if you're not really looking at this space. In fact, it's been said that we, as a species, have primitive brains, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. There has never been a time where that is more true. We've seen it this week almost more than we have in the past 6, 7 years. In kinetic warfare, in cyber warfare, and now in information warfare, defense has always trailed offense. It might even feel like whack-a-mole sometimes, but if you have nothing in place to defend your organizations and frankly yourself against manipulation, you will not be safe. Thank you very much.